Ladies and gentlemen, we know too many people are suffering around the world with injustice. A lot of people are incarcerated in prisons. Uh, Too many people are congested in the prison enterprises of many brutal systems. Well, one of the worst history in this regard went on Cambodia. Cambodia. During the Pol Pot regime and the Khmer Rouge, whatever they were doing, was just unbelievable. History remembers the Cambodian tragedy as one of the worst tragedies around the world. And here is a beautiful video because information is power, education is good. We got to know each other well, sustain the sufferings of other people who are still existing behind their loved ones that perished in different prison enterprises of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, look at this. And we're going to go slowly after this one to the Mariam Kimpi infamous prison system in Eritrea, in Asmara, where too many Eritreans went and perished. I'm not comparing both situations. Of course, the number in Cambodia, 25% of the population were just diminished, liquidated brutally by the Pol Pot regime, which didn't happen in Eritrea. But the torture, ways of torturing people, was basically the same. And here is a very beautiful video that I can share, and let's see what happens here. Let's see what happens, ladies and gentlemen.
They took Phnom Penh, the Khmer Rouge set the wheels of genocide in motion. That afternoon, troops fanned out across the capital, armed with bullhorns. Outside every home, every school, every hospital, they issued their orders. Evacuate immediately, abandon your possessions, and leave the city now. Anyone who refused to listen was shot, as were the slow, the elderly, and anyone too sick or disabled to walk. By evening, the entire capital, over 2 million people, was on the move. It was perhaps the largest death march in history. Tens of thousands were murdered on April the 17th alone, not just the stragglers, but also intellectuals, the religious, and anyone who showed any emotion. It was the beginning of Cambodia's year zero. Before the month was out, hundreds of thousands of executions would take place. Entire Buddhist communities would be slaughtered. The extended families of the rich would be exterminated. The survivors would find themselves separated from their loved ones and sent to toil in the countryside on starvation rations. Inside Phnom Penh itself, the population dropped to a mere 50,000, all Khmer Rouge loyalists. At some point, these loyalists stumbled across the abandoned Ponher Yat High School, renamed Teol Sleng following General Lon Nol's coup. The site must have made an impression because shortly after, the Khmer Rouge converted it into a prison. Known as S-21, it would soon become one of the deadliest prisons on earth. The Khmer Rouge's attitude to human life can be neatly summed up by one of their slogans: to spare you is no profit, to destroy you is no loss. In S-21, that slogan would reach its perverse height. The name S-21 first appears on Khmer Rouge documents in September 1975, some 5 months after the fall of Phnom Penh. However, it wasn't until the end of the year that its site was chosen. That winter, Teol Sleng School was converted into a prison, barbed wire topping its walls, its classrooms hastily partitioned into tiny cells, wire netting placed along the out-facing corridors to deter suicides. A workforce of 1,725 were brought in, ranging from guards and interrogators to on-site chefs and a barrage of record keepers, each of whom was forbidden contact with the outside world. But the most important appointment was that of Kang Kyu Lu, better known as Brother Dach. A former schoolteacher, Dach was the camp commander, and a guy so sadistic it'd make Amon Goth from Schindler's List look like a sane and reasonable guy. S-21 began operation.
I've had a very deep spiritual connection with the Cambodian people because of the Pol Pot history, of course, and I've been doing a lot of research in some of my materials. I have mentioned this guy, Dach. To see what exactly happened. At one point, I traveled from Bangkok, Thailand, to Siem Reap, Cambodia, and by bus. It was by bus. I had a chance to observe the countryside, the people's faces. The withdrawal effect is not complete yet. They're still suffering, but over 4 years at the time I visited the country. The trauma was just right there, ladies and gentlemen. And this guy, to me, was a very scary human being. He was a mathematics teacher. To my research, he ended up being the head of the security system for the per-part government. So the guy was so addicted with killings. He used to smoke cigarettes, they say, in the dark, late at night, where people were brought there to be murdered, sitting down, relaxing, and watching people being hammered on the head and getting executed. Unbelievable. My understanding, one of my research says he himself alone was responsible for 16,000 lives. Unbelievable.
In May 1976, officially it was a place for relocation, but this was just a euphemism. S-21's real function was to kill anyone who set foot there. We mean anyone. Some of the things people were imprisoned for were unbelievable. There was an inmate from a work camp who neglected to water the plants, or the Khmer Rouge soldier who was accused of planning to fall asleep while on duty. There was even a former S-21 guard whose crime was, we kid you not, beating a prisoner to death without permission. But then
they used to kill people for allowing prisoners committing suicide, listen to. If somebody committed suicide at that point, then the guards were responsible for not keeping him alive, for more torture. Yeah.
And that was the Khmer Rouge. One of their slogans went, "It is better to arrest 10 people by mistake than to let one guilty person go free." Those arrested included their own members. 500 high-ranking Khmer Rouge were tortured to death inside S-21, victims of Pol Pot's paranoia. Tempting as it is to see this as evidence of karma, no one deserved. They would then be photographed and taken to the guards for their first interrogation. Speaking of the guards, all of S-21's guards and interrogators were teenagers from peasant backgrounds, often as young as 15. That meant they had no problems being as violent as possible. The first interrogation was often benign compared to what came later. Prisoners were forced to strip naked and give their entire life story from birth until their moment of arrest. This done, they were either taken to a tiny cell and chained to the floor, or taken to a larger room and shackled to a group of other prisoners. Wherever they ended up, it was a nightmare. Any action a prisoner undertook required permission. This included sitting up, using the toilet, or just shifting their weight a little. Anyone who failed to get permission would be beaten, and anyone who cried out while being beaten would be beaten some more. The cells were filled with mosquitoes, and severe overcrowding meant disease was rife. But while there was an average population of 1,500 prisoners on site at any time, you rarely saw the same faces. The life expectancy of S-21's inmates was anywhere from a few weeks to only a few days. When those few weeks were finally up, well, we're about to find out.
If you are sleeping in a position...
If there's a single vaguely positive thing you can say about Brother Dach, it's that he kept excellent records. As a result, we have an extremely good idea of what daily life looked like in S-21. At 4:30 a.m. sharp, prisoners were woken up and made to strip for inspection. That done, they were led from their cells, and the daily rounds of interrogation would begin. Now, interrogation is a misleading word. It makes it sound like the guards were looking for evidence of guilt. But under the Khmer Rouge, simply being a prisoner was proof of being guilty. In fact, the Cambodian term for prisoner, Niek Thos, translates as guilty person. Yet it wasn't enough for the guards to just kill you. They needed you to confess to a crime first. And these confessions were extracted in the most horrific ways. Prisoners were subjected to mock drownings, to electric shocks, to having their hands tied behind their backs and being suspended from the ceiling until their limbs broke. People were beaten with clubs and whipped with cables. Salt water was poured into open wounds. The craziest part is that the guards didn't know what they were looking for. The prisoners would confess to the wildest things to stop the pain, only for Brother Duch to read the report, declare it phony, and authorize yet more torture to get a real confession. When Duch finally had the arbitrary confession he wanted, it sent his report to Central Committee, who'd compile that day's must-smash list. Smashing someone was Khmer Rouge speak for killing them. Their list compiled, the committee would send it back to Duch, who'd sign off on it. What happened next depended entirely on who you were. Former Khmer Rouge officials who wound up on Brotherhood's list would be killed then and there in S-21, their bodies buried in the courtyard. Any Westerners, and a handful of Brits, Americans, Australians, and Canadians did pass through the prison, were killed, and their bodies were burnt to prevent identification. And even a seat in one of the trucks that arrived at around 9 p.m. Each night, anywhere between several dozen and 300 prisoners were loaded onto these trucks and driven 14 kilometers outside of Phnom Penh to a place called Chong Ek. The prisoners were told they were being transferred, but if you had known Chong Yek's other name, you'd know that this was a cruel lie. Chong Yak is better known as the biggest of the killing fields. After the trucks arrived, the prisoners would be herded into a small building where their names were checked against another copy of the day's list. Once everyone had been accounted for, they were taken out in small groups to pre-dug pits. There, they would be told to kneel and their hands tied behind their backs. Finally, a guard would kill them with 1 or 2 blows to the back of the neck, usually with an iron axle. In the Khmer report, S-21 was hell on earth, a place so brutal that it could rival Nazi Germany. Luckily, the regime behind it, though, they were on the edge of collapse.
It was a very informative video, and I hope you enjoyed it one way or another. Histories like this is history of the world. We all have to preserve histories like this. In what? In museums. And then the question is if S-21 was preserved for tourists to see and to understand the suffering of mankind in Cambodia. Good thing is they have a museum there. And let's see this out. Let's check it out. This is a museum, and people around the world go and watch it. Beautiful. These were victims, innocent victims of the crisis.
public way and cut themselves. Some of them know they don't have and just cut them. And some publics are not going every 1,000 and sometimes they sold out like this. And they told me that grandmother night they do.
The end of the story today, ladies and gentlemen. Don't forget, subscribe and like and share, because information is power, and we all got to go through the same kind of spirit as universal human beings to feel, compassionately feel human suffering everywhere in the world. I'll see you next time. And of course, the kind of tortures that went on here used to go on in many prison systems around the world. And in Eritrean, Mariam Gimpi, site of torture for Eritreans during the struggle for their independence. So we're going to inform you as it goes, but I'm trying my best to have a museum in Eritrea for their history. I'll see you next time. Make sure you like one more time, subscribe, like, and have a good day.